Okay. It is October 19th, 2012, and we are interviewing Janet Henry, make sure I have your name right, about Hurricane Diane. And basically, I'm going to start with some questions, and looks like everything's working fine here. Think back to the time of the flood. Where were you, and what were you doing when you first heard about the flooding?
When I first heard about the flood, I was getting off a bus from Richmond, Virginia. I had just come up. My sisters kept me down there because of the weather. They had a terrible storm down there, and they were afraid to let me go. And beautiful sunny day, I pulled out of Richmond and arrived up in Pennsylvania, in Scranton, and found out that my home had been flooded. My folks had all been moved to a different area, another family member or whatever. We had several family members lived in the area, but not below the hill, as they called it. We were down below the hill. My cousin in his house across from ours, all the way across the whole yard, or the whole block. But nevertheless, they were right at the edge of the creek, and the bridge was there right alongside his house. And I do believe the bridge was hit by boxcars when they came down, and finally, because they were all blocked up the valley, and it burst open when the water came through. It brought those boxcars down, and they did a lot of damage. Houses on Richter Street, all up from his house, were moved out, some of them into the creek bed. One of them, the gentleman, was on the phone at the time, and he was washed away, apparently, but they've never been able to find a body or any kind of remains. So that's what they have to assume, that he was washed away. And the other lady was on her porch, and she got washed off her porch. That was up on Ash Street. And they found her in Southside, up against one of the wrought iron fences over there in that area.
You were on a bus, right?
I was.
And from Harrisburg, you said? And do you remember on the way up to Scranton, did you see anything? Or did you hear anything?
I didn't actually hear a thing. Like I said, I was the only one on the bus. And it really shocked me because it rained. It was raining and it was nasty. And of course, we've had bad weather before, so that wasn't a big shock. But, watching out the window and looking and seeing a lot of nothing, really. Dark. It was dark. It was midnight when I arrived, so I missed it all. Thank God. I didn't need to see all of that. But when I got home, they told me we had a flood and we weren't going home for a few days, weeks, whatever. It took a while.
How did they, when you got to the bus station, how did they let you know that there was something had happened?
The only gentleman that was in the bus station was I forget what they call them, but anyway, he said, "You must be Janet." I said, "Yes, I am." He said, "I have a message for you." So he said, "You're supposed to call your aunt." And he gave me the number, and I called her, and of course my mother got on the phone, and she said, "Oh, we've been flooded out." So now I still don't know how bad that is, because as I said, it could be the basement, it could be the backyard, it could be anything. But we were down in it's like a gully, really. I mean, the hills everywhere you go, and the creek on the far side, behind Jimmy's house, my cousin, behind his house, the creek was right there. The yard was only from here to there. So it wasn't like a huge yard. And they had been washed and washed, how it eats away at the ground. And that's how close, that's what I knew about the flood until the morning. And the sun came out, and I went over and took a look from one of the hills and was told then that, well, I wasn't told, I overheard after. I'm thinking it's only up to our living room floor. That would be good. And the gentleman next door said, he said, "Believe it or not, it's gone down 12 feet overnight." So I knew that we weren't going home for a while. Mm-hmm. They had to send in the National Guard. They were at all the entrances to the area and patrolled all the time. Made sure nobody came in to try and steal anything that was available. And a lot of people, you couldn't take anything out with you because it was such a shock, I think, that they went out in boats, some of them. And the boats were there and trying to get the last minute folks, "Get out of your house, please, you're going to be hurt." But some of them didn't listen, and they did survive. They stayed upstairs. It would have to be upstairs, because it really was that deep. Amazing.
Do you associate any sounds or smells with the flood?
Well, silence is what I remember. There was nothing going on down there. No houses, no kids running around, no people, only the National Guard. They would let us go back after a few days. It certainly wasn't right away, but they would let us go back and do some work in the house, like, you know, get rid of things that had to be thrown out, and at that point the land was not totally dry, but it was muddy, but it was usable. I mean, you could walk in and go in the house and whatever. My brother-in-law took the television, he took the back off it, and he said, I think this will be okay. He said, if it dries out, we'll just take the back off and let it dry out. And he faced the back toward the wall. And then somebody taking a chair out that was going to be thrown away, or bringing a new one in, I forget which, bumped the TV, and it hit the wall, and that burst the big, whatever it was, the screen. And you remember how those console models used to be. Wow. So there went the TV. But at that point, it really was small potatoes, you know?
Yeah. What do you remember about the first few days after the flood?
Going down into the house and seeing strange things that you never knew were in the house. And at one point, my mother was puzzled. She said, look at those things on the floor. There's chunks of wood, maybe like ovals, and they had little grooves in them. And it looked like fresh wood because you could see the back of them where they had been somewhere, but we couldn't figure it out. And all of a sudden, one day she looked and said, Grandma's table. She had a beautiful, from Germany, beautiful, just a little, like a, I forget what they call them now. You put it in front of the window and put a pot of flowers or something on it. It was, the legs were square, and they went straight down. Now these legs had embellishment on them that were beautiful. You would never ever dream that it wasn't a whole thing that was carved out. Well, it was. It wasn't a carved out thing at all. It was these blocks that we found that had been glued on them. And there were 4 legs, and then a crisscross thing here. And but all these little clumps of things were stuck there. And altogether they were beautiful, but piece by piece they had no meaning at all, you know? But, and to think that things you took for granted, you know, now they're not there anymore. And everything had to be, not everything had to be thrown away, trust me. You couldn't take any clothes out. They wouldn't let you take your clothes out. The church up above the hill was my church. They had a clothes drive, and anything you needed or wanted, you could go there and find. But then the things that were personal to you, that were just downstairs in a drawer, say, I like to draw. I was always coloring when I was little and drawing when I was older. All my pencils and my crayons and everything were in the drawer. Well, they weren't any good. Everything, it just got dumped. And it wasn't even a hesitation. It's like, boom, gone. So I'll never forget it. I really won't. And that is many, many years ago. I was only 14. Did I say 15, actually? And I won't tell you how old I am now, but it's a good many years, long before you came around.
Anything else? Any other memories or anything you want to share about it?
No, just that you never saw these people again. You know, I mean, for a while, but everybody was so busy putting their houses back together. Those that could, and those that couldn't just walked away, I think. Because what are you going to do with a house like that that's all worn and weathered, and they weren't new houses down there anyway, you know, so I'm sure it was harder for those. But at any rate, yeah, just the destroying of the whole area. It was such like a clan, you know. Everybody knew everybody. You didn't dare do something in somebody's yard because they called your mother. They didn't fool around. They didn't tell you. They called your mother, and your mother knew who they were. And she'd tell me I knew who they were too. Yeah. Well, I walked on their sidewalk, or I walked in their yard, or I took a flower, whatever. Those were the things that you miss. Because now we went up to the top of the hill. I don't know if you know Petersburg, but
yes.
the corners. All right, I lived on the first house in Dunmore on Irving Avenue. That's where we moved to. And it was an apartment, an upstairs apartment. We never had an apartment before. We always lived in a house. And we didn't know anybody. We didn't know anybody. And first house in Dunmore, I had to go to Dunmore High School. I came from Tech. I had 1 year at Tech already, I think. Yes, I did. And I didn't want to leave. Mr. Murphy made it okay for me to go. He was our principal. And he told me if I stayed with my aunt on top of the hill, I would be able to stay at Tech. So that's what we did. It was only around the corner from my own home, so it didn't matter, you know what I mean? I could run home and run there too. But basically I stayed there with her, and thank goodness she was there, or otherwise I would have been either that or pay tuition, which we couldn't afford, especially after the flood, you know?
Sure.
I mean, your resources are wiped out. My dad, he didn't, but we got new linoleum. The linoleum was big. We got new linoleum and had the cupboards painted, and we were in pink and gray. That was the combo at the time. That was really nice. And not new counters, but everything was all cleaned out and scrubbed out and sanitized, or whatever you want to call it. So we knew we were okay going back in that house. And I was going to tell you about it now. Anyway, Daddy was sitting at the kitchen table one day, and I'm still looking under cupboards to see what was there, and there was a big Mixmaster. And I said, oh, let me see, to myself, let me see if this works. So I pulled it out, and I put it in the sink, and he's watching me, and now keep in mind, he's an electrician all his life, right? So plug the thing in, turn the thing on. After I put the water on it and rinsed it all off, soaking wet, put it, and my hands are wet, plugged it in and turned it on. And guess what? Nothing happened.
Oh.
It went zzz, it worked.
Yeah.
So then I pulled the plug, and I was scolded. Don't ever do that again. All right, Daddy, but I'm going to scrub it now that I have it unplugged. Okay, now that it's unplugged. Anyway, that was one of the episodes that, oh, I know, the flood. We were told there was another storm coming, and it could be as bad or worse than what we just had. Now, this is after we got in the house again. And I was so taken with this new kitchen. It just looked so pretty, you know, and all it was paint. Really, we didn't buy any new, I mean, the stove still worked, the refrigerator was okay. And I begged my father to take up the linoleum. Now I cannot remember if he did or he didn't. But if he did, we left the house for the night, and then came back the next day, and there hadn't been not even a drop of rain. So I'm hoping that I didn't tell him or that he didn't listen to me. But it always was nice. So I'm thinking that he didn't. You know, he just, we're going to leave, and whatever we find. We'll get new, he said. So who cares? But those are things that you don't forget. And my sister, one of the girls that I was visiting in Virginia, they all came up to help us clear out and clean up and get back. And they brought money from their co-workers who were generous enough to take a donation. PP&L was very good to my dad. A lot of things like that you don't think about. And if somebody comes to your door and says, you know, how about $1 for the folks down below, you know, would you believe them? Not this day and age, maybe not. You would be afraid to give it to. I'd rather take it down and give it to the people than hand it to somebody. But they were all very generous, and that helped a lot too. And that's it. I mean, I just will never forget it. It was a big thing in my life. Kind of, you know, keeps you on the even keel. You're not such a smart aleck. When you grow up a little bit, you can be a little bit more compassionate to people, because who knows what they're going through, you know? That's all.
Okay. Well, thank you very much.
Oh, you're quite
Thanks.
welcome.
Thank
I hope
you.
I didn't talk too long.
No, perfect.